Hey, everybody, and welcome to this edition of The Studio Life. This is our very first live show, and we're pleased to be able to bring this to you. I think we jumped the counter on this a little bit, and I guess that's part of our very first show. But thank you very much for joining. Hey, and this is a project where we're going to talk about studio news, industry news, things we really, really care about. And it's a little in the weeds. It's sort of a chat where we have the opportunity to bring the industry together, and we could talk about hot topics. We could talk about all kinds of things that are going on in the world. We have our channel. If you like what we're doing, please tune in and subscribe and yada, yada, yada. You know, it's just a community. And so it's sort of like a fireside chat. Our goal is to talk to industry experts, but really to provide some real news, things that matter in the world. And there are always news stories. There are always things we care deeply about. And we're going to talk about all of that stuff. But for now, there are a couple of bits of news going on in the world. And it is probably worth talking about. I actually think that this first story is a very real story as we think about the Oscars. And there are reasons why the Oscars are so important. The world looks at the Oscars and it judges us. It judges Hollywood and the actors and the industry based on what it sees. And it judges us very harshly at times. If people are feeling if it perceives us as entitled or spoiled or something like that, then we now know that there's something wrong with our brand. And there's something wrong with our brand when the universe believes we're picking the wrong movies. The Oscar voters are picking the wrong movies. And it is worth mentioning that I'm not an Oscar voter, but I was a Grammy voter for a lot of years. And so as we think about the process of voting, one of the things that strikes me is that it's an incredibly special thing that we get. We are blessed. I was a Grammy voter for 15 years, and I had to work really hard to get there. That was a lot of album production credits and engineering and things like that. And I never took that for granted. I always thought that voting for the Grammys was one of the greatest things I could ever be blessed with. I don't know how I got so lucky. I don't know that all Oscar voters or Grammy voters feel the same way. A lot of people get to vote because they've had one hit that became a Grammy awarded piece or something like that. But it really is a blessing because, like I said, the world looks at us and they judge whether or not we're taking our part seriously to deliver entertainment and value and information to the world. And it's complicated. You know, sometimes it's biased and sometimes it's unbiased. Sometimes it's serious and sometimes it's goofy or irreverent. It always changes, but we as artists get to do that. That's our blessing. But when we vote, we should take that really, really seriously. And now there's this new requirement that Oscar voters are supposed to actually watch the movies that they're voting on. And this seems like a big deal, right? Or it seems like not a big deal. It seems like it should be something that is so self-obvious. And yet there's a requirement to put that rule in place. The implementation of this is going to be really, really difficult because there are a couple of steps that have been put in place in order to try to make sure that people do vote. They have to certify that they've voted, right? Or they're going to be logged as part of the in the viewing room as far as whether they've watched. But you could still do what you do on any test, right? You can start the test and then leave for 3 hours and then come back and hit close, or you set the alarm on your iPhone so that the world knows that you were there at the right time to click stop, but in fact, you weren't there at all. And we all know that that's going to be a part of it. But the idea that sets a standard for Oscar voters to watch the movies is really important. And there are a couple of movies that I actually sort of objected to the outcome. Now, clearly there's a subjective component here. I am not representing the 10,000 Oscar voters with my one singular opinion. But the truth is, there are times where it seems like it goes awry. And when it goes awry, it's unfortunate because it knocks out other competitors that probably should have had a more equal vote. And it's funny because Variety kind of called this the brutalist rule. And I couldn't possibly agree more. The brutalist to me was never a complete story. It was long and rambly, and yes, it was beautifully shot, but did it deserve to be the best picture? Not to me. Honestly, all due respect, not to me. I was pretty bothered by The Brutalist when I walked out. Because to me, a great movie is supposed to be everything. It's supposed to be the best of what you could do cinematographically. It's the best of what you could do sonically. It's the best of what you could do from a story perspective. And as we think about The Brutalist, I did not see all of the components that made for a spectacular movie. And there were others. I mean, my personal favorite was The Substance. I absolutely 100% loved The Substance. It was original. It was from a stylistic perspective and a camera perspective and a sound perspective and a story perspective. It was just an entire piece. And I have to wonder, as a horror genre piece, whether the Oscar voters actually watched The Substance, whether they voted for The Brutalist because it seemed like everybody else was. And The Substance may not have gotten the viewers. When I think about being forced to watch a movie, and you know that there are going to be people that now can complete a certification saying they watched it, but the other part of it is, how can you actually watch a movie effectively if you're staring at a phone? How do you hear surround or Dolby sound, completely immersive, if you're staring at a phone? Or how do you see incredible camera work if you're staring at a phone? And how do we know you're not even looking away? To me, the standard's not even high enough. We should make the voters take their jobs so seriously that they have to sit in a screening room. I don't even understand this half measure. But I want to offer the idea that as we chat about this, and if you have comments or thoughts, please, let's argue this thing out. But I think that this is such a special opportunity, such a special gift, that we should make people treat this just as special as we would require of anything else. All eyes around the world, billions of eyes are on the outcome of this. This country has been blessed not only with inventing feature film, with the Lumiere brothers and Hollywood and all of this stuff, but the ability to have the #1 award show in the world. And if we don't take that seriously, this is just another thing that we're giving up. We're giving up the opportunity to preserve the magic that Hollywood has kind of created. We want people from all over the world to come and celebrate Hollywood. Another example of this is Oppenheimer, where I looked at it, again, you call it a hot take, call it whatever you will, but when I saw Oppenheimer, what I saw was a long and rambling story. And if you look at the poster, as you see right here, you'll notice there's incredible fire, right? But the movie has almost no fire. The fire is only in one tiny little scene. The premise of Oppenheimer was misrepresentative from the very beginning. It was a biography. It was a story about somebody who started at A and went to B. But you saw the whole transformation of that person, but yet it wasn't a coming of age story. And when we looked at Oppenheimer and we saw that beautiful fire, what we wanted to see, I think, is the story of the bomb. We wanted to see something legit and meaningful. We wanted it to be harsh and gut-wrenching. And it wasn't. It wasn't anything. It was long, and I do have to ask. Now, it wasn't I don't think the greatest year for overall best picture movies, but I don't think it should have won by default. I feel like it was given a massive advantage because of the hype, because of the way it was portrayed in the advertisements and things like that. It just seemed like not an objective vote. And I know that in a world of art, there's going to be subjectivity. When I saw Pulp Fiction beat Forrest Gump, it killed me. It ripped my soul out. I can't understand how Forrest Gump could have beaten Pulp Fiction for Best Picture. But at least I could understand how that feel-good movie, which was a great movie, could have gotten those votes. But I do have to wonder whether the Academy voters actually watched them all. Did they watch Pulp Fiction, or was it too harsh for them? And if it was too harsh for them, maybe they were not a good judge. And I look at it, Demi Moore, and I look at the substance, and it was a brutal movie to watch, but was it given a fair shot? Because it was, to me, Best Picture of the year. And so with that in mind, I do think that this is an amazing rule, and I'm so glad it was put in place. And if you can't handle the obligations of voting, then don't vote in that category. If you can't listen to the sound of a movie, not on a phone, but legitimately in an environment where you can assess that sound properly, then don't vote. There are so many people out there working their butts off trying to create the best possible sound, and they should be given a fair shot at this. Their handiwork should be listened to and evaluated by every single person who votes. Now, I love the idea with the Grammys that it's, and I think it was called pluralistic voting. I might have a mistake there, but where we all got to vote in a couple of categories, but the majority of the categories we had to pick. And the goal was so that we couldn't create blocks of votes. If we were voting on, best, storytelling album or whatever the category was, you were giving up other votes to do that. You were only given a handful of these specialty votes. So you had to actually care about it. But in the Oscars, where you had 24 categories and everybody got to vote on everything, maybe they're not qualified. Maybe they didn't give everything a fair shot. And maybe that's just not fair to be listening to either your movie studio or your friends or the press when you make your decision. So that is my take on this idea of Oscar voters. For God's sakes, watch the movies you vote on. Really watch them. Pay attention. And there you go. So with that said, the next big topic to cover, I think, are the sound stages. And there was an article that came out early on. I think it was LA Times that released it, but everybody picked up on this article. It came out at the beginning of April, really only about a month ago. And it highlighted the sound stages that are empty. And I think we have to ask whether or not these sound stages are ever going to be filled. Here, I will say we are on a movie lot. And this movie lot's been quiet. We have some incredible productions here on this movie lot. It's highlighted by James Cameron's stage where Avatar is filmed. It's not the only place Avatar is filmed. They go to New Zealand. They go where they need to go. They do what they need to do. And that means that the stage can't be filled the whole time if the crew is somewhere else in the world. And as a result, that's wonderful. That means that stage is being used effectively for what they do. But we have so many stages here that aren't. This was a lot. There were a lot of shows that went on here. This is the home of Ally McBeal all the way back, CSI Miami, Jane the Virgin, and so many others. It's also the birthplace of the volumetric stage. We're going to talk about volume stages in a little bit, but this is Mandalorian. And this is where incredible technology sits, and yet the stages sit mostly empty. And as you go around LA, the numbers are not all that much better. And the question I guess we have to ask ourselves is why. It's not just LA, although LA is being hit particularly hard. And so there are movements in place to try to make this better. The LA City Council just this week is considering waiving or reducing or modifying the permitting component because this was not a good area to get permits. They were expensive. They took time to get. It's a lot of red tape. Other cities, not so much. Much easier to film in New York than LA, believe it or not. Yet there are way more people in New York than in LA. It's easier to clear a street out in LA than it is in New York, and yet New York was easier to film in. And so the question really is whether or not LA still deserves to be the hub of so much production, and whether or not this is cyclical or whether something has to change. So I think we need to talk about some of the reasons why the industry is changing. And one, let's just face it, the productions are, well, the places, the distribution channels for those productions, they're getting narrower. When I guess a long time ago, I was reading this book called The Future of Music, and it talked about something called bundling. And the principle of this was that in a world of internet where there's going to be so much more content, an unlimited, infinite number of record labels, an infinite number of distribution channels like YouTube channels or Spotify, an infinite number of ways of distributing your music, that the opportunities for how that played out were going to become more and more limited. And they called it bundling. They looked at the industry and they said, it's consolidating. And when it was consolidating, not only was one company able to buy up a bunch of smaller companies, so you essentially had fewer distribution channels, even though you had plenty of record label names, but that they were also associating with production companies. Like, for instance, you might be producing the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl. Which means that maybe you might want one of your artists, because you were also a record label, to be running the halftime show. That way you're selling more copies of the songs or albums, you're selling more concert tickets, and you're doing it sort of as a built-in advertisement. So you had this thing called bundling. So even though you had an infinite number of channels, the effective number of channels were shrinking. Linear channels such as television was going away, but it was also being owned by streaming channels. So amazing performers like Grey's Anatomy were appearing both on the linear platform as well as on the online platforms. And so linear was gradually getting sucked dry. Now you could watch all of the Grey's Anatomies whenever you wanted. So little by little, what started out as 20 stations and then 100 stations and then 1,000 stations, even in the world of Roku, where you had all these unique platforms, actually started to diminish. And the same movie appears on Prime and Netflix and Apple. And so just like movie theaters, fewer and fewer and fewer theaters were showing different movies. The same 16 movies were appearing everywhere. So the industry was able to direct you only to what they wanted you to watch. So in a world of infinite content, you actually had fewer options for where to go. And so it's not just that they had plenty more content, which they did. Prior to the strike, there was an overabundance of content as well, meaning that there was less of a need to produce more content afterwards. The distribution channels were running out. But other things are changing too. One, these platforms such as Netflix or Amazon in particular, because both of them relate to the lot that we're on, they realized that it became more and more complicated to go to outside stages in order to produce their content. The stages were offering them fewer benefits versus what they could do if they spent millions or hundreds of $millions just to build their own stages. So that's what they did. So Netflix builds a facility out now. The news of this week is out in New Jersey. They're building what could be a $1 billion facility. Well, that's taking the business away from all the stages. The infrastructure is now vanishing. If you're not an employee or a specific contractor of some of these companies, you're now cut out. So the camera people and the lighting people and the stage owners are losing that business to these dedicated pieces of infrastructure. So all of these factors coming together. So you have the regulatory limitations making it harder to work outside of your building. You have the desire to own your own building, and you have less overall content needed because of this bundling component, fewer streaming platforms. And then, of course, you have a few other things, like the amount of talent that used to be available outside of LA didn't used to be all that much. If you wanted the best camera people, you were coming to LA. Well, now there are great camera people everywhere. It used to be if you wanted the best volume stage, come to LA. But now they're building volume stages everywhere. And again, we're going to talk about that. We have in our last segment, if you tune in and stay with us, we'll cover NAB and what they're doing with volume. So all of these are changes. So here's my prediction. My prediction is, yes, there's a cyclical nature to this, but the stages are going to have to evolve. We are not, the competition for who comes into our stages is no longer what it used to be. It used to be a show needed a home. They would look for available stages. Too many stages. So there are going to need to be shifts in this market, not just in LA, but everywhere, for what advantages we can give to productions for being with us. The pricing is going to need to evolve. The inventory of lighting that we provide may not be able to be a complete add-on. It used to be the stage rental itself was not your number one expense, but here on our stage, we simply bundle everything. We don't make people make hard choices. If you want to run a podcast, we don't say, here's how we're going to nickel and dime and break this thing down. We say, come into our stage. If you hire us for the production, here's the package of what you get, and it's valuable. And we want to do that because we know it makes it easier on the productions. And that's really the direction I think we need to go. Malls that didn't evolve, that didn't become entertainment epicenters, drowned. Malls that became entertainment epicenters not only are surviving, but they're thriving. They're bringing in huge crowds. And this is a time for evolution. This is, I don't know what it is. I have a lot of ideas, but I'm not the lot. I can't tell you what this lot is going to do, or Culver is going to do, or Paramount. I don't know. Obviously some are doing better than others. The Sony stages are rocking. Coyote, everybody's got their own stuff going on, but there's going to need to be some evolution because our clients are becoming more and more self-sufficient. There are more and more options, and there's more and more talent out there. So with that in mind, I did want to highlight all of this. And of course, just a little graphic there of an empty stage. It's a different world, and we are going to have to figure this out. This is great real estate with some of the smartest, best people in the world. And, it's getting sucked dry right now. And if we're going to stay vibrant, if the city's going to stay vibrant when it comes to entertainment, and even if sound stages all over the world are going to stay vibrant and necessary and full, we're going to see some changes. So I look forward to watching this news story play out, just like all of us. Anyway, time for our next segment. And NAB. And we should make a note of that because the audio did not come on there. But we know why, and it's our first show, and we're going to get this all fixed. So NAB, let's talk about what happened at NAB this year. Now, I've watched NAB. I not only watched the commentary on NAB and what led up to the production at NAB, the product releases, but I also attended NAB. And when I attended NAB, I was blown away, absolutely floored with this incredible amount of production that was out there. And I am a geek, and I loved every possible second of it. But here we are. You want something new, and I'm going to tell you something new. There wasn't a lot of anything new at NAB. There never really is. We wait for the gems. We're looking for the real magic. And as I walked around the halls, what I saw was things that were better. And I want to buy it all, by the way. I wish I had an infinite budget and could buy every last thing I saw at NAB. So, given that I can't, the things that I love the most, in terms of general product launches, the NAB was largely owned, I feel, by Ross and by Blackmagic. When you walked into some of these halls, you saw massive activations by these two companies. We're talking about things that were remarkable in scale. And Blackmagic really has earned a lot of that. They have continued to build products that were reasonably priced and extremely useful. They're not always the best products. They're not always the most user-friendly products, but they're remarkably economical, efficient products. They've got some higher end stuff. Their new camera is incredible. It's not cheap, but most of what Blackmagic offers is something that used to cost 1,000 times what it does, and now it's usable. They brought a lot of people out. They ran constant seminars on their gear, and there's really good stuff. So speaking of what I think was a massive highlight was Blackmagic DaVinci Resolve. This is new. A lot of this is new. We're talking about gimbal innovation at NAB and saying, yeah, it's better. They're getting better at this. We're talking about some of the ways in which we're handling IP. We're talking about some of the different ways we're handling security or data backup or all this. And yes, it's all better. KVM switches continue to rock. Being able to work on your computer either from another room or from another location. Really cool stuff, but it's been around. It's just incrementally better. A lot of the wireless gear, it's better. NDI, it continues to rock, but it's been around. We're all pretty used to it. What we weren't really expecting were some of the innovations that came from DaVinci Resolve. We're talking about using its neural network, I think is what they call it, in order to help with subtitles and transcription. We're talking about how do you rotoscope something even more effectively. Now, is that new? No. In DaVinci 19, Resolve 19, Magic Mask came out with an amazing way of rotoscoping and keeping a foreground out and getting rid of the background, creating multiple layers, all that stuff. Is it making green screen obsolete? Well, yeah, sometimes it is. This is really wild stuff, and their presentations were amazing. Their software continues to be amazing. It's so reasonably priced. It's just earth-shattering what's happening over there in the Blackmagic DaVinci Resolve space. Another area is the Arduino chip. I know it's kind of weird. The Arduino's been around a long time. Here we're talking about how easy it is in order to create new technologies that really make a difference. And so I continue to be blown away by pan tilt systems, by 3D or VR systems that are able to do remarkable things with very economical hardware. This is garage innovation. This is somebody who knows how to do a little bit of programming and pays a couple $100 and then can drive servo motors or can drive computer logic. I think when you offer something that small and that capable, we're just going to see new and more and newer stuff that is going to be pretty incredible. So all of that, really wild. But I'm a geek again. I still love cases and racks, stuff that is so boring and old school. And yeah, I loved it. There are some carts out there. The economical and incredibly capable stands from Studio Titan continued to blow me away. I spent a lot of time with the vMix folks. Blew me away at what is happening there, but not always in the obvious ways. A lot of the amazing innovation going on at vMix is not obvious. It's not simple, load the input and cut to it type of switcher. It's how you're handling a component of the streaming, or how you're handling a codec, or how you're handling replay, or how you're handling something else. And I spent time just sitting with them and learning and really developing a great understanding. But let's talk about the one thing that seems to be everywhere at NAB, which is these LED screens. They're not special anymore. They're just everywhere. The cost is coming down dramatically. The ability to work with a screen like this and be very fast and efficient with lighter components, easier setup, more and more less and less pixel density. Was it more and more? Anyway, pixels closer, meaning you were able to take screens that were nearly impossible to get your hands on for under $100,000 and bring them into your facility for 90% off of that price. And you're still able to achieve refresh rates in excess of 7,000 kilohertz. And you're still able to receive scan rates of, 1/10th, 1/15th, 1/20th, 1/40th. In other words, they are working for live production. They're working for broadcast work. And we're talking about massive decreases in cost. There are still companies out there that do not permit that are much higher end, that are using much more complex tracking, that are able to do things with those screens that are absolutely insane. One of my favorite things to see is when you're in front of a screen and you have two monitors, and one monitor you could see the completely composited background of what you see on the screen. And on the other monitor, you see a blue screen, because what it's doing is it's looking at every other frame and it's pulling blue frames on this screen and it's pulling background frames on this screen. So you actually have two shots in one where you can then composite the whole thing later if you didn't like the way it looked. This is wild stuff. And there's no way to explain it until you see it in person. There were companies like Zero Density, which I thought their presentation at Zero Density was another one of those moments where I just couldn't get enough of it. That's where not only do they create a beautiful background screen that works wonderfully, and they in that case they were using an LED screen, but only for a portion of the background. And not only were they then expanding the background so that you essentially created a completely immersive room that you can rotate the camera in 360 degrees, but they had AR completely built into this. And the whole thing is a front-end engine for Unreal Engine. You can do all of the design on the front end, and you're creating incredible programming on the back end with objects moving behind you, in front of you, and on the sides. Wild stuff. And so NAB for me was a lot of very cool, not a lot of super new, but what I'm seeing is that the innovation is really coming into its own. The programmers have and the technicians have gotten their hands on this stuff, and they're making it incredibly effective stuff. And so I'm having a good time with this. And of course, let's tie this back to what we talked about with the stages. If you have an LED wall, you can get away with a lot of wonderful achievements, while at the same time being able to move yourself into a stage that was not necessarily as functional as before. It's going to be a different world as we start to move into more and more into that space. And local independent people are going to just as easily have access to it. Now, you have access to it now, but it's going to completely continue to evolve. And so I'd like to think that we're going to talk a lot more about some of these products. If there's something you like that you saw at NAB or some new technology, let's share it. Let's talk about it, because it's a lot of fun. And now, in conclusion, thank you very much for tuning in and hanging out with us for this studio talk. We're going to have a lot more of these, and hopefully we'll be very targeted. We'll have a lot of hot takes. We're going to be blunt and direct and have a lot of fun. We're going to have some great guests on, and if you've got something to say, please reach out to us. It's going to be a wild ride as we enjoy the world of production and studio life. There's never going to be a lack of stories, and there's never going to be a lack of new technology, and we're going to really get to enjoy this over time. And so that's it for today. I'm Mark here on the campus of MBS Media Campus on our beautiful stage at Manhattan Beach Studios. We want you to hang out every time with us. So subscribe and tune in next time.